Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the June 11th, 2024 Zoning Review Committee meeting. We're still waiting for one more member to join, which will only take a minute, I'm sure. And actually, we need him to do the approve the minutes.
He's in there now, Chess.
Okay, great. All right, so I'd like to start with the minutes. I don't think we really need to read them. I hope you all have, and maybe we can approve those minutes. I would like a motion to approve the minutes.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes from May 14th.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
A second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, good. Next we have discussion updates on the sign bylaw. And I have a couple of quick comments for you, Bob. And it's really just not even real comments, but on page 3, under permanent signs. Sorry to take this out of order, but it's in the tables actually column. Yeah, okay, right there. You can stop it right there and go back up just a hair. All right, good. Everywhere else that I've noticed, under the general sign requirements, the part 2 of that where it's, or highlight 2, says no part of any sign shall be located within 10 feet of any street lines. And we had changed that to property line everywhere else, so I think we should be consistent with that.
Okay.
And then under permanent signs below that, the maximum size is 200 square feet. And under standards, under the I-1, it kind of opens up with that. So I think we could remove that bullet point as well. And that'll help all that stuff to all sort of line up a little bit better.
Okay.
I think that's the only. Oh, further on down, when we get to the electronic sign part, would it make sense to change or to on page 7, sorry. And we can discuss this as we go further with it. But it has business open or holiday decorative flags. Would it make sense to separate those into separate categories?
I'm sorry, where are you?
So right at the bottom of page 7, the headline is business open.
Okay.
Holiday deck. Would it make sense to break those into 2 separate or just leave them together?
Well, I would say leave them together because the standards for both of them are exactly the same.
Okay,
So if you make 2 separate subtables, you're just having repetitive language.
okay. I
And
understand.
they've been the same in your bylaw for forever, so you know,
Okay.
it's exactly that way in your current, the old bylaw.
Okay. A little further down on page 8.
Well, if I may, Chaz, I just
Yes.
want to jump up in. Does that limit the businesses so they can only do either or? Like if they put up a holiday flag, they can't put up an open flag? Is that you can only have one?
Well, that's the way it's written now.
I mean, I don't know. I don't see a problem with 2, but is there an issue by making it both at all? I'm just curious.
I would think that if we did separate it that way, it would allow for 2, Jeremy.
Well, the number right now says 1 per residence or business. You could just say 2 per residence or business. One open sign and 1 holiday decorative sign.
Does anybody have a problem with that language?
Could they misconstrue that they could have two internally lit window signs? Or
The
two
flag.
holiday flags?
that's that's
And
a
not the other one?
section, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a separate section. The business or holiday decorative flag signs are separate from internally lit window signs, so.
So to Jeremy's point, I guess, or to my point, if we split them and left out all the language the same, it would allow for two signs. Otherwise, you could have two open signs, which that's, I don't know really why you would want to do that, but you could also have, or you could have two holiday signs. Or one of each. Now, just something to think about. And the only other thing that I had a little bit further down on page 8, under local sales and public event signs, under maximum size right there, it's got the number 1. And I don't think that is what we want in there, so.
That's, that is a stray number. There is no maximum size for local sales and public event signs.
Okay.
That's-
That can come out. Those are my only, typos, if you will, or something to make it read a little easier. That's all, Bob. So, I guess, Bob, we should probably turn things back over to you then, and you can sort of walk us through some of the things that you wanted to talk about with the electronic signs or whatever, however you want to do it, Bob.
Yeah, so thanks, everybody. So there were, I sent into the town 2 documents. One was an expanded and edited table, signed table. And then the other one was, a memo on electronic message signs, which, I think we'll go over second, if we can just kind of work our way. There's not a lot changes in the table. We're at the point where we're sort of tweaking and editing. So, and I'm expanding as I'm starting to incorporate more sections of the text of the sign section into that we can incorporate into the table. So, at the top of draft 5, which is the new draft, the note is, sort of what's changed. The red language mostly is what's been added since the last meeting. There's a couple of places where I have questions for the committee. The off-premise sign, there's now an off-premise sign table, which takes text that's in sentences and paragraphs and puts it into the table to be consistent with the on-premise sign table. I did incorporate a new subsection on electronic message signs. It incorporates the language that was adopted, what was it, a year ago or so, for municipal and public and educational uses. And then I left a line blank because the committee, we'll discuss this in more detail when we get to the memo about, okay, what is it you want to do with electronic message signs? And how much and how little and how regulated, and et cetera, et cetera. But whatever the committee comes up with, with the discussion on electronic message signs, we can then incorporate into the table and the space that's reserved for it. The section on sign waivers for the B3 in I1 districts has been moved into the table for those 2 districts, so that people reading the table will know, in addition to these regulations, they can go to the zoning board for a waiver. So that's basically it. If you see anything that's in red that you have a question about, let me know. But on page 1, this is just a minor thing, but the current language refers to the highway department supervisor needing to approve sign poles and locations. I couldn't find any reference to a highway department supervisor on the town website, so I don't know if that was a real position still, or if that should be the, um,
Colin, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, you've got it correct, Bob. It should be the superintendent of public works.
okay, all right. All right, any other comment on page 1? Hearing none, the only,
One.
the only. Yeah, so on the page 2, as Chaz just noted on a further out page, you changed it to front property line instead of the street line, so that was changed. And I did add on the temporary sign row, since there is a little bit of language in section 7.2E about temporary signs, I just reference it so people will know there's some another additional section they need to look at temporary signs. Page 3, you know, again, this is what's in red is the related to frontage and access and one per business. Those were all decisions of the zoning committee.
Bob, if we go up just a little bit there.
Yeah.
Where it says general sign requirements.
Yeah.
That's the exact same language as at the very beginning. The first 2 bullet points. Should we leave them? Should we be redundant like that or not? Or what's your thought on that?
I'm not sure what you're referring
So
to.
on page 2, under general sign requirements,
Yeah,
first 2 bullet points are the first 2 bullet points in this section right here that we're looking at. On the
well,
screen.
that's because in page 2, these are 2 separate tables. So
Okay.
page 2 is the residential zoning district table.
Yep.
And page 3 is the business and industrial district
Okay.
table.
So it's what, okay,
It's the same language, but it's for 2 different purposes.
fine, okay.
Let's see. Page 4.
So just a point
Yep.
of clarification.
Sure.
Like, for instance, let's go up just a little bit more on standards. So there's, for instance, on the leftmost column, one per business attached flat against the wall. It says oriented to each street on which the premises has frontage or access. Oriented to each street, but it only says one per business, 12 square feet.
Yeah, that does say that. That's existing language, but perhaps that might need to be tweaked. Just saying oriented to the street on which.
Or to the main street on which the premises frontage or access. Or should we leave
Well-
it, or should we leave it optional, but one per oriented to the street?
Yeah, I would say the street, because if you use the word Main Street, then either
Okay,
people thinking you're using that as a proper noun, you know, Main Street, capital M, or people won't know what's a main street and what isn't a main street. so-
okay, let's change that to the then.
Okay.
Yep.
That might show up elsewhere too, Joe, because I think that phrase is used elsewhere. I'll have to double check that. Okay. And then page 4, again, just on permit requirements, where there is a sign permit required, we're adding sign permit required. And then page 5. Yeah, so here's another point on the standards under freestanding signs. It says oriented to each street, so.
Yep.
We'll change that to the street. Oops. And then at the bottom, again, freestanding signs location change to the street. Now, page 6, sign permits. Added, really no other, well, one per business, which we've like done throughout.
So now on freestanding signs, they're gonna have one sign, but it could be double faced because the freestanding sign
Yeah.
in front of it, so that has to be. So if it's up against the side of a building, it's gonna be one sign for the oriented to the street in which the premise is. But if it has a freestanding sign, is it gonna be a double-sided,
Yes,
triple-sided,
no, it,
four-sided?
I think you actually, I have to double check here, but I think you. Do you define freestanding as double-sided? In your definition section? Let me just check. Signs. No, actually, it doesn't specify. I mean, it's normally interpreted, I mean, freestanding signs are normally interpreted as double-faced. If you want to clarify that, I would suggest we put language in the definition section too.
Yeah, I'd go after the definition. Yep,
Okay.
if we can update that.
Yep, let me make a note.
And we've had we've had requests for signage that would be on the side of a building that would be double faced. So that was a no-no. Or it would be angled, so you would have a main street, but it'd be angled to the street, but you'd have a double sign projecting out. But that wouldn't be, that wouldn't qualify. That would have to be a freestanding away from the building.
Yeah, so if you want that kind of sign, your bylaw doesn't have any language right now that addresses that kind of a V-shaped attached sign, basically.
Yeah. Would we have to put in wording to prohibit that?
No, if it's not in here, it's not allowed.
Okay.
You see a lot of that, Joe?
Couple of requests.
Really?
Mhm.
Interesting.
Okay, that's, let's see, 5, page 6, again, sign permits, one per business. I don't think there's anything else there. Page 7. So. Well, the bottom of 6 and through the top of page 7 is where the current language on EMC signs are. It has been added. And then the location, you have 2 different locations, educational and municipal uses, which is in the current language, and then the second location is what we'll discuss later about where, if anywhere, you want these signs in business districts. So, at the bottom of that, some of the questions, and I have more questions in the memo about what do you want to allow here? One sign per property, one sign per business, one sign by zoning districts. How many signs, how many electronic message signs do you want to end up with in town? You know, that's a legitimate question for a town to consider. And should they be allowed in the B3 district or only in the B3 district? Because that's your major business district. And so you have already these standards in education and municipal uses. Would any of these standards be appropriate in the business districts? And what other standards might we think of? So we'll talk about that in a couple of seconds when we get to the memo. Let's see, that's page 7, page 8. The real estate signs, it was recommended that we had a height limit, we just used the same height limit on other similar signs, 8 feet above ground level. And also location, the setback location. Now that's where we are with the sign by law table. And with some of the tweaks you've recommended here in the last few minutes, the next draft of the table will include the rest of the language that's going to stay in text. It's not really the topic or the format is not really suitable for tables because it doesn't have, measurements and whatnot. It's just language, introduction and prohibited signs and other things. So I hope to have like a complete draft 6 of the entire sign section 7, at your next meeting.
Great, thank you.
So then on to EMCs. So one of the things that I did is I went looking around other communities, particularly up in your neck of the woods, but a few others, in terms of what they have on EMCs. It's not that common to have for sign bylaws to include EMCs. I think it's kind of a newly evolving sign mechanism. Some towns though have already adopted "thou shalt be prohibited," no EMCs. And I'm working with another town that they just decided some people wanted to allow the EMCs, but the zoning committee and the planning board decided, and even the select board decided they didn't want EMCs in the town, so that's a decision. And some of them are odd. The memo, I have, again, what kind of questions to think about for the town? Do you want to allow signs beyond the municipal and educational? Where should they be allowed? What specific districts? Should there be a limit in some way in the district, size of property, size of building? You have to be careful here because if you leave a big loophole, you'll end up with a street, your streetscape won't have street trees, it'll have EMC signs. Is it on-premise signs? Or would it be okay to have off-premise signs that are EMC signs? Height limit, setback limit, the kind of lighting, timing of changes. I mean, some of the bylaws I've seen in like California and Arizona are incredibly extensive and detailed because they really get into height and size and locations and landscaping around the building and this kind of lighting and that kind of lighting. You can't change every 8 seconds or every 20 seconds or no videos or yes video, all that. So that's kind of question 6. If you want limits on the message activity, quick messages, video messages, whatever. Well, here you can see Bill Ricker, Andover, and Methuen already have banned EMCs. Chelmsford, I actually don't understand this at all. They recently added these, but the language says such signs may not exceed 1 square foot in area. So
They're essentially
presumably that means it's a tiny sign on a bigger sign, one small section of a sign on a bigger sign can be an EMC, because you're not gonna have a 20-foot high pole with a 1 square foot sign on top of it, you know? So that was, I hadn't seen anything like that before, and I don't know the reasoning.
Sounds to me like they don't want any signs.
Well,
or
that could be a way of doing that.
Addressing it, yeah. Bob, let me ask you a couple.
Sure.
A couple quick questions. So a gas station, for example, where prices are constantly being changed. Some gas stations do that electronically, and some gas stations actually get up there and change the sign manually. Would that be considered an electronic sign?
What I have found, Chaz, is that the towns that allow, actually, towns that both allow and prohibit electronic message signs will have a separate section just for gas stations. And it will say, will have words to the effect that gas prices on the the freestanding sign out by the street and on the pumps can be changed electronically.
Okay.
So. I
Do
mean,
we have that type of language in ours? I didn't see it anywhere.
No, I haven't added any language to your bylaw yet on business signs, because I wanted to have this discussion with you
Sure, okay,
about, what are the issues? What do you do want? What do you want? What do you don't want? Like questions like you just asked, how are other towns handling this situation? So, but that's very common, gas stations can get their prices changed, sometimes on an hourly basis, electronically.
yeah, unfortunately,
You don't want some poor guy having to climb out there every hour to change the
right,
price
yeah.
of, 89 gas or something, so.
Okay. I'll go on record right now saying I really don't want electronic signs anywhere in business districts. I'm very happy with them in the education. I'm very happy with the one that's gonna go in the First Parish Meeting House for bulletins and so forth. But I really don't think that Tyngsborough is gonna want to have EMC signs going up and down Middlesex and Westford Road and so forth. Maybe that's just me.
How about Route 3?
So Route 3 is a separate thing. We've already got 2 out there, or maybe 3, Joe?
We've got a standard board and 1 electronic in operation and 1 electronic that will be in operation.
Okay. So I view that as a different animal. And I hope that it won't become oversaturated with signs out there. Do we get a lot of revenue out of those signs? Do you know, Joe? The town?
We do generate some revenue, but it's for a limited time.
Okay.
So, Joe, these are billboards, right? These are off-premise signs, or are they on-premise signs?
One is on town property that's licensed, and one is on a private business lot. That's the future electronic sign.
Well, the private business lot is not the location of the business that's on the sign, right?
It's going to be a general purpose sign. It's not just for advertising the business. It's secondary income to the business that's located there.
Right, but what's it advertising?
Anything that they can sell.
Oh, so it's a billboard,
It's a billboard.
but it's electronic.
It's electronic, yeah.
Okay. So
that'll be the second one that we have on Route 3. We have another one that's on, I believe it's on private property, but that's a standard billboard. It's not electronic.
okay, yeah.
So we have to be careful in the fact that I don't think a lot of people want to be doing standard billboards anymore, but if we just limit ourselves to the electronic version and we let go of the standard, who knows, somebody may want to put in a standard one.
So those were all approved based on a grant of numerous variances and a special permit, right?
Yes.
So, all right, so there's a question, and I got 3 decisions last Thursday that you had mentioned, so I didn't have those when I was doing this report. But I did read them. One of the decisions I really struggled with to figure out what the heck got approved here. But one of them, I think, was a little more clear that it was electronic, although I didn't see any specific language about, well, it was this kind of electronics and it was gonna flash or not flash or change message in a certain sequence or anything. I didn't know if the board, I didn't see any conditions related to kind of how that.
We don't have any conditions. That's why we're going through this right now.
Okay, so this is a fundamental question for the town. Do you want to have, if you want to have these kinds of signs along some stretch of Route 3, I don't know if you want to have them all the way up and down both sides of Route 3, but that's up to you. Then we need to come up with some criteria for how the board can approve those. And much better to be approved by special permit than variances, because quite frankly, if either of those cases get appealed to the courts, the town would lose. Not having a billboard on Route 3 is not a hardship. And the decisions are supposed to really have factual findings of what the hardship is. I didn't see any factual findings. I saw repetitive language that said, oh, we find that, the billboard's not going to be detrimental, and we find that, that the properties are unique, and we find that it's not going to affect the neighborhood. Well, that's just repeating the criteria. So you're really supposed to have facts behind the findings. So it would be easier for the town and much easier for the board if you can come up with regulations that, create a context for what you will allow along Route 3 and what you won't allow on Route 3, and then just have it go through the special permit process. That's good to know. I now I have a little better understanding of what's going on up there. So that's it. Now, so with that, Tewksbury, and I worked with Tewksbury on this, they have a fairly elaborate section. And we worked on this for a long time because there was a lot of controversy about it and different opinions and everything. But they, as you can, they permitted in specific 2 different districts that are adjacent to 93 or 495. And that's how they limit their locations. It's not anywhere on 93, it's not anywhere on 95, it's where they have zoned for either industrial or office and research zoning. And then they have, they have a setback of 25 feet from the right of way and a setback of 1,000 feet from any residential or multifamily district. Because of, you often see complaints, this is not uncommon at all, where there's land along the interstate or Route 3 going north or Route 3 going south, which happened down in Weymouth, where it's zoned industrial, so they put up an EMC sign, but the industrial zoning isn't very deep, so it's right adjacent to a residential district. And then the sign goes up, and people are getting blinded at night in their bedroom windows in the back of the house. So that's something to think about in terms of how to align this. And then, they have all their application fees and required information, which is something you want to ask. You want to be specific as to what you want to know from an applicant in terms of how the sign operates, the intensity of the lighting, all of that kind of stuff. There's sort of standard language that's in the Tewksbury one. You see this in various zoning codes that allow EMC signs. One's is EMC signs shall use automatic level control reduce light levels at night and under cloudy or other conditions, so. You know, the intensity of the sign may be higher up till whatever, 10 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night, but overnight, the intensity of the sign. You could also have it turned off, you could require it to be turned off overnight, or you could require the intensity to be lower. If it's near a residential district, for example. And so number 4, well, that's a good stop right there, Colin, this is a great location. Look at the type of off-premises signs that are prohibited, animated, projected, given the illusions of movement, flashing, blinking, intermediate flashing, searchlights, you know, physical movements. They have a 10-second rule for how often this EMC can change. You know, it has to change, boom. From this to this, no gradual or, you know, flashing up and down or rolling through. You know. I mean, they can do amazing things with signs, but this isn't Las Vegas, so. You know, videos, pyrotechnics, you know, anything that's going to be confused with traffic as a traffic sign. So. And if you could scroll up a little, Colin, so we could look at number 5. Yeah. So here's another one you'll often see, that there's a separation between signs. Again, this is a town decision, but again, you go through some towns, particularly out west, and I should say more like down south, and there's an EMC sign like every 200 feet, and it's just. It's like an EMC forest, you know? So thinking about separation from one sign to another. Again, double-sided. You know, so that's clear, you got one sign freestanding, but it's double-sided. And, let's see.
Bob, is that the sign size 14 by 48? Is that pretty standard? Because I've noticed that in a couple of them.
It seems to be, and, you know, I have some documents from the International Sign Association, which has a lot of research, does a lot of research on all kinds of signs, and this is kind of the size that they seem to have recommended, and I think this is somewhat what the industry is used to now, getting used to. But I'll double check on that.
Joe, do you know if that's the size of the signs that are permitted right now on Route 3? Or are they?
I can look it up, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, again, like number 10, you know, no glare into the abutting properties or abutting roadways. Landscaping at the base. And then, so then there's the criteria for approval. So if, you know, something to think about for the zoning board here, that, you know, you have some guidance as to the basis you will use to approve or not an application for an EMC sign. And you can see some of them. This is pretty simple. There are some zoning codes that have a much more extensive criteria.
I think this is great.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. I especially like the distance between signs. And the proximity to residential.
And then, you know, and this is kind of true of all signs. If you could scroll up a little bit more, Colin, so we can, you know, look at some of the you know, maintenance of signs, abandonment of signs. I don't know if we've reached the stage yet where EMC signs are being abandoned, but certainly, you know, you can drive around and find abandoned billboards. And some of them have been up for a long time. And so you don't wanna, end up with that kind of a situation. You really wanna kind of plan ahead here. But they have all provisions kind of, covering those circumstances.
Bob, do you have any, I noticed that, 10 seconds seems to be the change time.
Yeah,
Um, if you're traveling in a car up Route 3, 10 seconds, are you gonna see like a couple of changes? Are you gonna see one change
but
or?
if you're doing 100 miles an hour, you probably get half a sign, and if you're doing 45 miles an hour, you'll see 4 signs. Yeah, I don't know what the magic is about 10. I've seen 20, I've seen 18, I've seen 8. I don't think there's a magic number here.
Okay,
So I don't, if the average speed going up Route 3, I was gonna say, if the average speed is 60 miles an hour, but having driven Route 3 outside
Yeah,
of
it's,
rush
yeah,
hour, it's a lot higher than that.
yeah,
But, I mean, from a distance, from a distance, you probably could see things change, but you're not gonna be able to read it depending on, the size of the font and everything on what's on the side. But when you get closer, you might see, 1, 2, maybe 3, I don't know.
you have any feel for, how many different messages these signs? I'm sure you can put as many as you want on there, but how many actually get used? I mean, if it's a 10-second change and there's 6, so every minute you're back to the beginning again, or?
I don't, this is just anecdotal, because, my weird planning background, when I drive around, I pay attention to things like signs, and not just stop signs, So some of these EMC signs will have a change in message, but it's basically for the same company or the same product or something like that.
Okay,
Whereas others might change from product to product, or company to company, or something like that. So like Joe mentioned earlier, it's, whatever they can lease it out for.
so I mean, I've noticed that in driving around, if you've got the exact same commute to work every day, for example, you see the same thing over and over again, so you don't notice anything. But if you've got a sign that's gonna change every day, you're gonna be looking at that sign to see what the new message is, because other than that, the ride to work is the same ride to work. Any feel about, I mean, does it even make any difference that these signs will change all the time and be
Well,
distracting to drivers,
yeah,
or?
no, I would say this, Jazz, they change, but they don't change all the time, and what I mean by that is they're leasing it. They don't lease, a spot on a sign for 10 seconds to 1,000 different companies.
Yeah,
Yeah, they lease long periods of time, so companies will get a 10-second bite at it, maybe, I don't know, 20 times an hour or something like that for the next 2 months or 3 months or whatever. So you're gonna be seeing much more likely, you're gonna be seeing the same message over and over again for a period of time. Or the same multiple messages over and over again for a period of time.
so typically a company would lease the sign for a 3-month period or a 1-year period. Do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long time. I mean, when, it's easy to change these, obviously, but billboards, you see
Right,
the
that's,
billboards are the same billboard for a year or
Right.
6 months,
okay,
it's easy to change this, but, it's easier for the company to lease space for 6 months or a year to a few entities than it is to lease it for a day or two to, hundreds of entities. So they're looking for longer term leases.
yeah,
Who
okay.
decides if the message is appropriate on an EMC?
Well, ultimately a court, but I know what you mean. I
Because it's something that can be changed at will. So.
Yeah, I mean, you're really, you're dancing on the First Amendment right at the moment, as to who decides what's appropriate. Um, but,
So
I-
somebody puts something up there that's obviously blatantly inappropriate. There's no quick fix.
there's no
Right.
quick fix. I mean, you do see sign bylaws that have, I mean, the kind of old time bylaws that have, language like, the message shall not be inappropriate or offensive. Well, First Amendment covers offensive messages. So, but if it's so bad that everybody's complaining about it, then, I think the check on that is, bad publicity in local social media or in newspapers to the billboard company. And, people picketing outside the billboard company's offices, so things like that, that gets more attention than, yeah. I mean, I'll look around to see if I can find any language related to EMCs and inappropriate messages. And see if I can find anything, but, ooh, that's a third rail, I will tell you.
And that would be initiated by the town to try and get that taken down, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, the town certainly should, and I've seen this happen where, citizens complain to the town and the town goes talks to the billboard company. And often that does result in, that message disappearing.
Yeah.
The other thing I will point out is that these signs will be, I don't know, along, I'd have to look at your zoning map, but along Route 3, what are your zoning districts along Route 3? Do you have industrial there, or is it a business district, or is it residential district?
Well,
Or a mix?
it's a mix, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, I know
So-
along Kendall Road, some of it's business.
yeah.
On
so-
the Dunstable side, it's residential, so.
Yeah.
But
So-
I saw a section where you'd have to have 10 acres of property in order to even consider this. I don't know how many parcels along there that are 10 acres. And then if you include that separation of 1,500 feet or maybe even, 3,000 feet, it would probably limit, you could probably look at a map and figure out how many more would be acceptable.
Right, yeah, we'll have to take a look at all of that.
Yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to point out is, even if the sign is in a business district and it's being put up for commercial purposes, advertise businesses or anything, they still have a constitutional right to put up non-commercial, what's called non-commercial speech. So they could put up political messages, they could put up, save the whales, or, any kind of political message. They could put up, support for some, the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, or they could put up, support for any kind of nonprofit organization. So while it's predominantly going to be used for business, it can be used for other purposes of a non-commercial speech nature. And that could include the town. I think one of your approvals, one of the conditions was that the town there would be some access to the town to put messages up on the signs. Is that correct, Joe?
Yes.
Yeah, so, your town could use it for its own messages as well, so. Even though it might be in a commercial or business or industrial district, it has the opportunity legally to advertise beyond commercial businesses. So the other interesting, town was, there are two more towns here. Well, Stonehill, to me, this is odd. Stonehill has a very elaborate regulations. But way down deep into the regulation, you read that effectively, it's only their EMCs are only allowed in 2 zoning districts, both of which are adjacent to Interstate 93, and each zoning district only gets 1 sign. So there's 2 EMC signs that are allowed, but they have these incredibly elaborate restrictions and language, text, just for 2 signs. So, that's how they limited it. They said you can have one in this, right along 93, they have 2 different commercial districts. And you get one in one district and then one in the other district. And then, Drake has, very limited, regulations, but they have restrictions, no moving display, animation, this one I don't like. It says the brightness and intensity of illumination shall not be greater than necessary to meet the reasonable needs of the business or use served. What the heck does that mean? How is your building commissioner gonna go out and determine that this sign is not, the illumination is too great for the business needs? It should be lower, there's no standard there, so you want to avoid those kind of wishy-washy conditions. And, so, and in Drake, you'll notice the message cannot be changed more than 4 times a day. Not every 10 seconds, but every 8 hours. Not 8 hours,
6.
6 hours, every 6 hours. So that's the other end of the spectrum. One end is you can change every 8 or 10 seconds. Some are in the middle, 20, 35 seconds. Some, and I've never seen one like Drake before, 4 times a day, but there you go. That's their message. That's what they, and then in Dennis, you could see their EMC signs were only 32 square feet. So they limit it by size. So there were a lot of parameters here, but I think the decision, if it is a decision, I don't want to jump the gun here, or to limit it to the zoning along Route 3 will start shaping what the regulations are, as opposed if you were limited it on, Westford Street and allowing it on Westford and Middlesex Turnpike and everything. That's a different environment, so.
So let's do a little straw poll here. I mean, so that you've got some kind of an idea of what we're thinking, Bob.
Okay,
It seems like we certainly want to take advantage of the Route 3 corridor. But I would like to have some sort of control so that the town is getting something, even if it's on private property, other than the $2,500 fee that was suggested by Tewksbury. I'd like to see the town get some kind of residuals. Is there a way to build that into the?
yes, it is. Yeah, there is.
Okay,
Stoneham had a fairly elaborate section on town revenue, and I think that's because they were only gonna allow 2 signs, but I thought one of the decisions by the zoning board had a condition in it that the town was gonna get paid $20,000 a year for some number of years. Is that correct?
Yes.
and
So
is
if
that
you're
with
gonna
all
do
of them,
that,
Joe?
No, that was on a case-by-case basis. It's not written on any bylaw.
So the most recent one that you just approved, is there anything for the town in that?
I believe so, yes.
Okay,
yeah, but you wanna, if you're gonna do that, you wanna have that language in the bylaw,
Yes.
you know.
Right now it's ad hoc. It's sort of
ad
like
hoc
an offering to the town.
Well, Judge, they just offered us the $20,000, so we were happy to take it. That's all that happened. It's like, yeah. So, but towns have done that. So until there's a court case that says you can't, I think, that's one thing you could do.
Okay, so I'd like to see the limits on the proximity of the signs to each other so that they're maybe at least out of line of sight. I like that. section that you had of the 1,500 feet or any number of feet. There was also another section in there that you'd have to have a minimum of 10 acres. That would also limit the number of signs in any location, right? So that would be a sign in town, Middlesex, or along Route 3.
I think,
I-
that's a possibility, Joe. I think, first of all, somebody, you know, we need to look at the properties along Route 3 to see what sizes they actually are.
Yes.
And, you know, how many properties are 10 acres or,
Yep.
you know, or more than 10 acres? And, you know, are they in the business and district and, you know, that where you could, you know, if you say you can only do it in a business district and you have to have 10 acres and nobody has 10 acres in the business district, then you've eliminated some. So,
And also the proximity to residential.
and proximity to residential too.
Yep.
Yep, I agree with all those, Joe. Do we want to prohibit these along Westford and Middlesex, for example? Other than town-owned properties?
I would start with that.
Yeah.
Do we all agree with that? Jeremy, you too?
So I guess right now it's just, there's no real restriction in town. It's just that they've been gravitating towards Route 3 just because of like where are they absolutely prohibited from right now?
Well, they're prohibited everywhere in town. But the zoning board is granting variances and special permits to allow them. So, as Joe just said, that's kind of on an ad hoc basis. So you could ad hoc a new sign on Middlesex, you know, Middlesex Road as well as Route 3 right at the moment. So, that's why we're trying to, you know, create the criteria for this whole use.
Yeah, so, I mean, my fear is, okay, you got some. Let's just to use Nature's Remedy for an example, and I don't mean to pick them out, but if they've got a lot of money, they could put a, you know, they could petition the town and take it to court if the town said no, to put a sign up there saying, you know, this blend for $20 or something like that. And they could change it every 10 seconds, and so I absolutely do not want something like that to happen. So we need to have language that says, no, you can't do that. Because by saying we're allowing something to happen, doesn't necessarily have the language to say we're not allowing something to happen. And if
I
we-
know it's tough. It's because like honestly, I'm not a big fan of any of these signs to begin with. I'd rather not have any of them. We didn't want that one that recently came up near the old sports center. So I mean, sometimes crafting additional language, it almost shows that you're encouraging it. So I'm at a lot. I don't know if I'm helping the conversation, but I mean, I'd rather err on the side of prohibiting it as much as we can.
Well, right now, if a special permit is granted and a variance, and we have no regulations to go by, they can come through like Bob was saying, and if you don't grant it, they can come back and either, you know, file lawsuit or whatever. Again, that's not a hardship, but it has happened, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, you know, quite frankly, the difference between a special permit and variance is, that, you know, if they don't meet the standards of a variance, the board's on solid ground to say no. You know, and but the special permit is more of a discretionary process, and that it's up to the board to decide one way or the zoning board. In this case, the zoning board, one way or another, so. But whether you prohibit them everywhere or prohibit them somewhere and allow them somewhere, you're just at a much better legal foundation if you add language like criteria and, you know, conditions and standards. Because if you do end up in court, you want to be able to win your case.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for explaining.
So how can you say we're gonna ban them throughout town except for the Route 3 corridor with those special conditions?
Well, that's what Tewksbury did.
Yeah.
They're banned in Tewksbury except for the two zoning districts along 495 and 95. With those other standards that limit it, the separation and, all of that. So, and I think that's not uncommon, because obviously advertisers want to advertise along interstate highways or the equivalent of interstate highways. So communities say, well, okay, you can be out on the interstate highway, but you can't be anywhere else in town. So I wouldn't worry about that. If, we can write language to that effect.
And as a committee, is that what we would like to see done?
Yes, and I think you said also exempt gas stations from that and public buildings, public schools, I think we said, right?
Well, that's
Yeah.
already in your bylaw, so you're covered right now for those two.
Okay.
So I know you mentioned something about close proximity to an R use, a residential use, but is there anything that could we put anything in here about visibility of it or how many feet it should be within? I'm just concerned about like if a single family house neighborhood over along Route 3, if they're staring right at it and it's through their window, their bedroom window or something like that.
Well, yes, and sort of, I guess my answer is. So, sort of is visibility. Well, somebody could be 2 miles from there and just because of, open views from, and they're on a hill or something, they can see the sign out on Route 3. Just being visible is not necessarily the criteria. It's sort of the closeness or the distance from the sign to the residential. So part of the exercise here is going to have to look at the zoning along Route 3 and what are the distances from those the business zoning districts to the closest residential houses. And that might shape what kind of criteria you want to use for separation. Because if the closest house is a mile away, that's different if the closest house is 100 feet away. And I don't have, off the top of my head, I don't know how close the houses are to Route 3 or to the business districts along Route 3. But that needs to be looked at. But it's it is a controversy on a lot of these signs when they go up, the nearest neighborhood can see it.
So we ought to get together, Chaz, and map out the corridor, the Route 3 corridor. If we're in agreement about limiting or eliminating any of that on Middlesex or Westford Road or anything like major thoroughfares, but just limiting it to the Route 3 corridor. Let me take a look at the GIS map, I guess, and map out those parcels and get some dimensions from neighborhoods, industrial and business locations and parcels that I kind of like the 10-acre criteria. I mean, we'll just map out the parcels that are abutting and get a dimension on those, how many acres those parcels are. We'll work from the southern border or the northern border to the southern border. Take a look at that.
Yeah,
Prepare that prior to next meeting so that Bob can take a look at that. We can have that as a discussion on our next meeting.
yeah, I think Colin could, if we still had Eric Salerno, Eric would have all that information for us right now, but we don't. So perhaps Colin could put that together and send it to Bob sometime maybe in advance of the next meeting, so he'll have it. So
Absolutely.
I don't know the answer to this, Colin. Do you have a GIS person in town hall?
We use NIMCOG for
Oh,
maintaining it, but we certainly have access to the GIS files.
oh, okay, all right.
Okay, well, we'll leave that with Colin as an action item. All right, so we really decided we're gonna limit these to what we already have, which is town and education. And add Route 3 and block out everything else then. With the parameters that we've discussed about residential and so forth, and I guess, Colin, you'll be able to figure out if we're gonna try and set acres for something to be put on, the GIS would have that as well.
Yeah, our mapping software knows the size of all the parcels along any public roadway.
So we could be able to determine what we want the acreage to be. I mean, if there's nothing that's 10 acres, then maybe would look at maybe 5 acres just to throw out a number. To
Right.
see if that would work. If we're gonna try and, okay. Bob, anything else you want to discuss with us here, or?
Let me just, I was just looking over my notes here, so. Well, the other issue, I mean, I'm not looking for definitive answers now, but okay, I don't know were there a height limit that the ZBA is ad hoc for the signs that have been approved, or they just come in proposing a height and you've approved whatever height it is? So that's one question. What are the height limits you want and what are the size limits? I couldn't, in reading the decisions, I couldn't find anything that specified, that told me how big the signs were.
It was on the,
Oh.
we usually listed as the plan of record when they come in, so that we sign the plan of record and date it, and it becomes part of their package, their build-out plan. So each one could be slightly different. We didn't have any criteria for that.
Right.
The height requirement, has to fall, less than the fall radius of the sign, to the public roadway. So we cannot encroach, we can encroach on the public right of way, but not the road surface. So for instance, the fall radius has to be less than the distance to the side shoulder of the breakdown lane.
Well, that could widely vary, could be, 80 feet or 800 feet. If you
Well,
have an 800-foot tall sign.
We always look for that, fall radius, and that's been included on all of our projects.
I think it would be better to have something that they're all
Yeah, some
restricted
sort of
to.
standardization, yeah.
Again, just for, I mean, for a lot of reasons, so it doesn't put a burden on the ZBA, but also for consistency. Why should this guy end up with an 80-foot sign and that person end up with a 60-foot sign? And
He's got a taller sign.
so, I mean, all your other sign regulations are consistent. Why not have these consistent, size-wise, height-wise?
Oh, yeah, no, the criteria that you have, I think it was, I forget which community it was, that was very specific.
Yeah.
Would be looking to
Tewksbury,
copy, Tewksbury's.
okay.
Yeah, Tewksbury seems to have done a very good job with this, so.
Yeah.
Good. Certainly,
Yeah, and
Steal
we
from them.
started that a number of years ago when, really EMCs were at the infancy. And we had to work, I think it was part of a complete redo of the bylaw, but it was like over a 2-year period of getting, working on the sign bylaw, putting it aside for a little bit, working on it, trying to find out more information, trying to wait for other towns to adopt regulations that we could look at. So.
No, that was a good one. You guys were right on top of that one. Yep.
Yeah, so, lucky Tyngsborough, you got one just down the street there.
yeah. All right, do we need to discuss anything else tonight, Bob, or you got enough to?
And for the signs, I think that's, all I have. I don't know, your agenda has, next steps, next meeting,
Yeah, we do
Future.
have that on here,
future. Those aren't my topics.
right? All right, so July 9th is technically our next one. The other thing we need to discuss, I guess, Colin, is the future of this committee. And
Yes.
let you talk about that.
Yeah, so when the committee was first established, it was not a recurring committee. It had a 3-year charge, which expires on June 30th. The select board does their annual appointments this time of year, but we didn't do the appointments for the zoning review committee at their first June meeting because we wanted to get feedback from this group first. They'll consider on the 24th. Select board member Eldridge, who isn't here this evening, suggested that since we had talked about potentially looking at the table of uses as kind of like the last item as a part of this project, that it might make sense to have the select board extend the charge for 1 more year. And then perhaps zoning changes would be a focus of just the ZBA and the planning board. But I guess if anybody felt differently about that approach, I can share that information with the select board at their June 24th meeting. If everybody is okay with that approach, then I think what we would see happen is the select board would reappoint everybody to June 30th, 2025, so 1 additional year. And that would allow us to finish the table of uses, which I think what was left or fits within the scope of what's left with the Barrett Group.
No, actually, that's not correct. The last meeting, and I don't know if that's in the minutes, or the last couple of meetings, we talked about that, and the decision was because of the budget was that we would finish up the sign bylaw and we would address the definition section and not the table of uses.
Gotcha. That was probably just a typo on my part.
And then that would be the end of our contract, unless you want to renew it, but it's the end of the current contract.
So, Colin, my question to you is obviously we had a budget to work with the Barrett Group. Where do we sit on that? Has that been exhausted or close to being exhausted? Will it last another year, or how does that sit?
To Bob's point, it would end with that contract, which probably gets you through the definitions.
Yeah, we have, actually, we just submitted the bill in Tyngsborough, an invoice, and Tyngsborough just paid it. And I think that leaves us with a little over $12,000 left.
And that would be sufficient. to-
12,000 will get you the sign bylaw completed and some of the definitions attended to or added to or tweaked or whatever.
And do we anticipate that could be done within a year and within the budget?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And would the budget perhaps extend beyond a year?
We being Judy and I, Barrett Planning Group and myself, I do not intend to do that. Once we finish the sign by law and take the definition section as far as we can with the money that's left, that's it. There won't be any more money, and the most, I guess we'll have to discuss this as to what the plan is for going to town meeting. Would that be next spring, or would the sign by law go this fall and definitions next spring, or both next spring? So we could be in a position where we would have the drafts done. We'd certainly go to the planning board public hearing, and we could be in attendance at town meeting, but that would be it. We wouldn't be drafting anything else.
Do you feel it would be a year to do that? So we would do the sign by law in the fall and then do the definitions in the spring? Is it conceivable we could do both in the fall, or?
Well, I will talk to Judy.
Okay,
I think I'll have to get, Colin, can you just give me a ballpark of when town meeting is in the fall, when the warrant would need to be signed?
Absolutely. 1 second. I can tell you exactly when. Fall town meeting is on Tuesday, October 22nd. So the warrant, since it's a special town meeting, would need to be approved 2 weeks before that.
Oh, well, that helps. It's not like 2 months before that.
Yeah,
So then the planning board could hold a public hearing in September. Or even, in September. So we've got 2 months, 2.5 months. To finish up. So if we, at the July meeting, we'll have, as I said, the rest of the bylaw into the draft. The rest of the bylaw, I don't think it's gonna take much discussion, maybe some tweaking, but it's, pretty simple language. I think the biggest conversation in July is going to be about the EMC sign. If we can get that pretty far down, we can give you a new draft in August. And then maybe be ready for a public hearing in September. I will talk to Judy about what her schedule is for tweaking and adding and fixing some of the definitions. But I think that could also be done in time for fall. So if we can get both of them on fall town meeting, then we'd be done.
Okay,
You guys wouldn't be done, the town wouldn't be done, because there's still lots of other things that need fixing in the bylaw, but
so Colin, I guess my suggestion would be, yes, let's extend this for 1 year.
perfect.
But I think the goal of the committee might be to try and wrap things up for the fall town meeting.
Excellent. That is all I needed from the group.
Okay. All right, so if we're done tonight, we'll get together on July 9th. And with that, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you all for your time tonight. And we'll see you next month.
thanks
Thank
a
you, Bob.
lot. Appreciate
Bye-bye.
it.